The stagecoach rattled to a halt on the edge of Dustwater, just as the sun began to bleed into the horizon. Gold light stretched over warped wooden rooftops and silent porches, casting long, reaching shadows across cracked earth. Dust rose in slow spirals as the driver stepped down, wiped sweat from his brow, and opened the door with a grunt. Eleanor Kane stepped onto the dry ground with careful grace. She wore her best dress, blue cotton, faded at the seams but freshly pressed, a hat with a ribbon that had once been ivory. In her gloved hand, she clutched a small leather satchel, worn soft from years of travel. Her eyes scanned the town. 2 saloons, a church with no bell, 1 general store, and a cluster of townsfolk watching her from a distance like she was some curiosity spilled out onto their dirt. She was older than they expected. She could feel it in their stares. Pastor Claiborne arrived with the measured urgency of a man accustomed to command. Tall, stern-faced, collar starched into a blade. His gaze swept her up and down with a flicker of confusion that quickly hardened into disappointment. "You're Miss Kane." She nodded, chin high despite the ache in her chest. "Eleanor Kane. I came in response to your letter." He hesitated, eyes darting toward the gathering townsfolk. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Her throat tightened, but her voice remained level. "Your letter was clear. You asked for a God-fearing woman of good temperament, capable of keeping a home. I am all those things." He stepped back as if her presence offended the air itself. "Yes, but what I meant was someone younger, more suitable for building a family." "You asked for a wife," she said, voice sharp now, dry like sun-scorched wood, not a broodmare. Gasps fluttered from the small crowd. Claiborne's jaw clenched, but he said nothing more. He turned away, muttering something about dignity, about misrepresentations, before disappearing into the church. The crowd began to disperse, some with amusement, others with pity. No one stepped forward. Ellie stood still until the dust settled, then turned and walked. She didn't know where she was going, only that standing still felt like giving in. Her boots scraped over splinters of the boardwalk as she passed shuttered windows and rusted signs. She paused outside the saloon, where muffled piano notes tumbled out like broken teeth. The smell of whiskey, tobacco, and something else, gun oil, clung to it like mold. A voice called to her from the shadows near the back door. "You looking for a place to sleep, ma'am?" She turned to see a man sitting on an overturned barrel, his coat patched at the elbows, brim of his hat pulled low. Smoke curled from a cigarette that barely glowed. His left leg rested stiffly on a wooden crate, and though his voice was flat, his eyes, what she could see of them, were not unkind. "I don't suppose there's an inn," she said, trying for grace but landing somewhere near exhaustion. "There's a room behind the saloon kitchen," he offered. "No lock, but dry roof. Better than the street." She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you. And your name?" "Vale," he said simply. "Deputy Tomas Vale." He didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Just stood and limped forward, cigarette trailing a ghost behind him. Inside, the back room smelled like pepper and grease. A cot in the corner, an oil lamp, and not much else. Ellie set her bag down without complaint. When she turned, Vale was still standing in the doorway. "They'll forget," he said. "Folk, here we got short memories." "I don't need them to forget," she replied. "I just need to survive." He tipped his hat once and disappeared into the dark. That night, Ellie lay awake listening to the creaks of wind-battered walls and the distant clink of glasses. Her heart pulsed slow and heavy. This was not the life she'd imagined when she answered the letter. But then again, she had long ago stopped expecting life to answer to her wants. In her mind, she returned to the last winter in Montana, when her husband's cough turned red and the roof sagged under the weight of snow. She remembered shoveling his grave alone, frost cracking her knuckles, while the wolves howled from the tree line. She had buried hope that year, but something in her, stubborn as root rot, refused to die. Morning came gray and cold. Ellie washed her face in a chip basin and tied her hair back with shaking fingers. She stepped into the street as the first shop doors opened, and eyes turned toward her again. Not with welcome, not yet, but not with cruelty either. She asked for work. At the tailor's, she stitched buttons. At the schoolhouse, she offered to read with the youngest. At the general store, she swept the floor without pay. They let her. Slowly, warily, they began to nod when she passed. No one said her name, but they no longer looked away. On the second evening, she sat alone outside the saloon, watching the sky bruise purple. Tomas Vale joined her without a word, easing himself down beside her with the weight of an old wound. They didn't speak for a long while. Finally, she asked, "Do you believe in second chances?" He took a long drag of a cigarette. "Only for the ones who know what the first one cost." She nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Then I reckon I've earned mine." A flicker of something passed between them. Not warmth, not yet, but understanding. A quiet agreement between two people shaped more by what they'd lost than what they'd gained. The prairie wind picked up, and with it came the smell of distant rain. Ellie closed her eyes and breathed it in. It smelled like something old waking up, like memory, like warning, or maybe, if she was foolish enough to believe, like a beginning. The days in Dustwater passed slowly, measured not by clocks, but by the rhythm of chores and the shifting light. Morning sun crept across warped floorboards, and dusk arrived like a hush falling over the land. Ellie Kane moved through it all with quiet precision, hands never idle, eyes always watching. Her presence became a part of the town's fragile machinery, unspoken, necessary, and faintly misunderstood. She taught the Perez boy how to write his name in the dirt behind the smithy, patched a seamstress's swollen fingers with poultices of willow bark, and carried bread to the widow Lark's stoop before the old woman could open her door. She never asked for payment, only place. And little by little, the town gave it. Deputy Vale watched her with the same wordless care he gave to stray dogs and wounded things. Sometimes he offered her work. Simple jobs, sorting through a cluttered storeroom in the jail, translating a note written in broken Spanish. She did them all without question, and though his face remained unreadable, his presence became steadier. He limped a little less when he stood near her, spoke a little more when dusk stretched long and unbroken. One afternoon, while Ellie swept the front of the church, the same building where her pride had been left bleeding, she heard the low, deliberate clop of hooves. The kind of sound that didn't belong to a passing rancher or a preacher's mule. The kind of rhythm carried by men who brought trouble tied to their saddlebags. She turned in time to see the rider approach, tall in the saddle, lean, with a black duster that whispered as he moved. He dismounted in one fluid motion, dusted his gloves, and looked around like a man cataloging threats. His face bore the hard sharpness of the plains, sun-carved, handsome in the way a blade is handsome. He carried no badge, but every step he took was a declaration of law or its absence. He walked into the saloon without a word. By sundown, his name was known. Seth Ryland, a bounty hunter, the dangerous kind, clean-shaven but caked in blood you couldn't see. He asked about a girl no older than 15. Half-native, pale eyes. Said she'd been spotted heading south with a group of settlers a week past. Claimed she was dangerous, that she'd knifed a man in a border town and vanished into the dust. Ellie heard his voice from the saloon doorway. His tone was casual, but beneath it ran something else, certainty, hunger. Not the kind of hunger born of justice. The kind that licked its lips while pretending to pray. Tomas didn't flinch when he heard the name. Just stepped out from the corner of the jailhouse porch, his expression flickering into something brittle. Ryland turned to him with a grin that carried no warmth. "Well, I'll be," Ryland said. "Didn't figure to find a ghost wearing a badge. Sergeant Vale. Thought you died in Arroyo Ridge." Tomas's jaw tightened. That was a long time ago. Not long enough for me to forget. Still walking with that limp, or is that just penance? Ellie stood still in the street, hidden in the edges of shadow. She watched the way Tomas's fingers hovered near his belt, how his shoulders coiled like rope under strain. "What do you want here?" Tomas asked. "Same thing as always," Ryland replied. "Justice. Girl fits the bounty. Thought maybe you'd help me find her. You know I'm not that man anymore." Ryland laughed, sharp and unkind. "That's funny, because I remember a time you said that before, and bodies still hit the ground after. The silence that followed was too full. Ellie turned away and walked, heart tapping quick in her chest. She didn't know the girl Ryland spoke of, but she knew what it meant when men like him came sniffing around with folded papers and drawn pistols. The law didn't always follow justice. Sometimes it choked it in its sleep. The next morning, she found the girl hiding behind the stable. Skinny, sunburnt, with dirt under her nails and blood on the hem of her skirt. Her eyes were the strange shade of stormlight, gray, with green flickering beneath. "I ain't dangerous," the girl whispered. "I ain't." Ellie didn't ask questions. She took the girl into the kitchen behind the saloon, fed her what was left of last night's cornbread, and let her sleep under a pile of old coats. She told no one, not even Tomas. But he knew. That evening, he came to her door, hat in hand, eyes hollow. "She's the daughter of a woman who saved my life," he said softly. "During the war, Apache healer. She hid me when I was supposed to be the enemy. The girl's mother. She's gone now. And this one, she's what's left." Ellie's voice caught in her throat. "And the bounty? Fabricated. They want her for who she is, not what she's done. Then she stays," Ellie said. Tomas nodded once. "You're braver than I gave you credit for." "I'm just older than you thought," she answered, and for the first time he smiled. Small, worn, but real. Over the next few days, Ryland searched the town. He turned over crates, paid for silence, glared into shadows. He asked questions with the edge of his knife, but Dustwater, small as it was, held its breath and said nothing. But time, like heat, pressed in. On the fifth night, Ryland caught Ellie near the well. He didn't touch her, but his presence felt like a hand at her throat. "You strike me as the type who knows things," he said, voice all molasses and menace. "See, that girl didn't disappear. She's here, and I reckon someone's going to pay for hiding her." Ellie didn't blink. "Reckon someone's going to regret looking too hard." He stepped closer, and she could see the bloodlust flicker in his eyes. Momentary. "But you protect her," he said. "You make yourself part of this." "I already am," she whispered. He left her standing in the dark, heart hammering like a runaway horse. When she returned to the saloon, the girl was still sleeping. Tomas was waiting in the alley, rifle slung across his back, jaw set. "I'll take her out before dawn," he said. "Get her past the canyon." "And if he follows?" Tomas looked past her, toward the prairie. "Then I stop being a deputy, and start being what I swore I'd never be again." Ellie nodded, slow, every inch of her body thrumming with dread. As Tomas turned to leave, she touched his arm. "Don't do it alone." He looked at her, and the wind stirred the dust between them. "I won't," he said. The stars above Dustwater flickered faint and far, and the girl in the kitchen dreamed of rivers and fire. Outside, the prairie held its breath for what was coming next. The canyon loomed to the south like a scar carved deep into the earth, its edges jagged, its shadows thick with silence. Dawn broke slow and gray, streaking the sky with bruised light. Tomas led the way on horseback, rifle strapped across his back, the girl, Lita, clutching the reins of a mule behind him. Ellie walked on foot beside them, boots thudding soft over sand and stone, her breath clouding in the chill. She hadn't meant to come this far, but when she saw the girl's fear, tangled in her too-thin frame and clenched jaw, she knew she couldn't stay behind. Tomas didn't protest. Not when she saddled her own mule at first light, not when she tucked a revolver into her coat pocket with shaking hands. They understood each other now in ways neither spoke aloud. Past mistakes had fused into the marrow of their bones, and neither of them carried any illusion of safety. At the edge of the canyon, Tomas pulled up his reins and dismounted. "We'll cut through the ravine, less likely to be seen." Ellie nodded, jaw tight, as Lita slipped down beside her. They moved together in tense, practiced silence. Somewhere behind them, back in Dustwater, Ryland would have woken to an empty trail, and Ellie could already feel the heat of his fury traveling behind them like a phantom. Lita stumbled on loose rock, and Ellie caught her before she fell. The girl's face was pale with exhaustion and fear, but her eyes were sharp, watching, listening. "You're not like the others," she whispered, voice hoarse. Ellie offered her a canteen. "Neither are you." They pressed deeper into the narrow pass. cliffs rising on either side, the sun climbing higher but never touching them. Tomas walked with slight limp, but his pace never slowed. Ellie could see the old soldier in him now. Trained movements, measured glances, always listening to the silence between bird calls. By midday, they stopped beneath an overhang to rest. Tomas knelt in the dirt, drawing rough lines in the dust, paths, guesses, memories. Lita curled up nearby, already dozing with one arm wrapped around her knees. Ellie sat beside him. You knew her mother. Tomas didn't look up. Her name was Salai. She stitched a bullet out of my side during the winter of '68. I was sent to wipe out her village. Instead, I crawled into it bleeding and delirious. She hid me, lied for me, risked everything. You never told anyone? No one would have listened. I buried her name like I buried the others. There was weight behind his words, guilt braided with gratitude. Ellie could feel it pressing against his ribs like broken glass. She reached for his hand, resting hers lightly over his weathered knuckles. She saved you, she said. She gave me a debt I can't repay, he answered. The wind shifted. A sharp whistle through the canyon. Tomas stood in a breath, grabbing his rifle. Riders! Ellie didn't question. She shook Lita awake, and the three of them scrambled to their feet, ducking into the narrowest split between the rocks. From a high ridge, they could hear hooves, fast and close. Voices echoed off stone, bouncing distorted down the walls. Ryland's voice cut through the canyon like a knife. She's with the woman and the deputy. Bring them all back. Tomas motioned for silence. Lita trembled beside Ellie, fingers digging into her sleeve. A rock skittered loose above them, bouncing down the ravine wall. A shot rang out, loud, sharp, cracking the air like dry bone. Run! Tomas shouted. They bolted, scrambling over sharp stones, ducking under dry brush. Ellie's lungs burned. The revolver in her coat knocked against her ribs, heavy and foreign. Behind them, gunfire rang out again. Stone splinters whistled past her cheek. They reached a narrow choke in the canyon, where the rock walls drew so close the mules couldn't pass. Tomas turned, rifle raised, body braced. Get her out, he told Ellie. I'll hold them. No, Ellie said, voice fierce despite the shaking. You're not dying here. Another shot, the crack of lead against stone. Lita screamed. Tomas didn't hesitate. He took aim and fired. One rider fell from the ledge, crashing down in a spray of dust and limbs. Ellie pushed Lita forward, guiding her through the pass. Go now, she urged. The girl obeyed, darting ahead into the narrowing light. Ellie turned, breath ragged, heart drumming so loud it muffled everything. Ryland appeared at the edge of the rocks like a shadow born from the land. His pistol glinted. His smile was wrong, too calm. You're a long way from the churchyard, Miss Kane. And you're a long way from justice, she spat. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. You really think she's worth dying for? I don't think it, Ellie said, drawing her revolver. I know it. She fired. The shot missed wide, but it startled him. He stumbled just long enough for Tomas to strike. One brutal blow with the butt of his rifle. Ryland fell, blood streaking from his scalp, but not unconscious. Ellie stood over him, revolver trembling in her grip. You won't stop, she said. No, Ryland muttered, smiling even through the blood. Tomas limped to her side. Then don't give him the chance. Ellie didn't shoot him. Instead, she stepped back, and Tomas brought the rifle down again, clean and final. Ryland didn't move after that. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was jagged, like the pause after a scream. Lita stood at the canyon's far end, watching, arms crossed over her chest. A child and not a child. Changed now like all of them. They buried Ryland in the canyon. Shallow, fast, no prayers. By dusk, the wind had picked up again. It whispered through the rocks, tugged at their clothes, tried to erase their tracks. They rode back to Dustwater as shadows lengthened across the land. Lita rode ahead, quiet but no longer afraid. Tomas rode beside Ellie, his sleeves soaked with blood from a grazing shot, his face unreadable. She didn't speak. She only reached for his hand, and this time He took it. Behind them, the canyon swallowed its dead. Before them, the plains waited, wide and empty and uncertain. But in the space between, where blood and silence met, something had shifted, a bond formed not from promises, but from survival, and that perhaps was more enduring than love. Tomorrow would bring choices, consequences, new threats. But tonight, under a sky washed clean by danger, they were three souls bound by fire and still moving forward. The church stood quiet in the dusk, hollowed by disuse, but still clinging to a skeleton of reverence. Wind tugged at its warped shutters and sighed to the bell tower, where no bell had rung in years. Inside, the wooden pews were coated in dust, and the pulpit sagged forward like it carried too many unspoken truths. Tomas sat alone in the front row, head bowed, hat cradled in his hands, a strip of cloth wrapped tight around his shoulder. The blood dried now, but the ache beneath it still fresh. Ellie stood in the doorway watching him, shadows slicing across her face. Behind her, the town stirred with uneasy energy. Word had spread. Not of the canyon, not yet, but of Ryland horse returning riderless, rein slack and saddle stained. Dust water had its ways of knowing things without being told. She stepped inside, letting the heavy door creak shut behind her. Tomas didn't look up. "They'll ask questions soon," she said softly. "They always do," he replied, "just never the right ones." She moved to the pew beside him, the boards groaning under her weight. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, but her voice remained steady. "She's safe now," Ellie said. "Lita, far enough south, she can melt into the land." "She won't stay safe," Tomas murmured. "Not forever. The world doesn't forgive girls like her for surviving." Ellie nodded. "Then she'll learn, like we did." They sat in silence, two shadows among many. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting red light through the warped glass windows, turning the dust in the air to gold. "She asked me if I believed in God," Tomas said suddenly. Ellie turned to him. "And what did you say?" "I told her no, not the kind with a book and a sky throne. But I believe in what people choose to protect. That has to count for something." He looked at her then, and for a moment, every line of pain in his face softened. "Maybe this town's done pretending to need saving," he added. "Maybe it just needs someone to stay." Ellie didn't answer. Instead, she stood and walked to the altar. She touched its edge, traced a groove where someone once carved initials into wood. The echo of hymns long forgotten still hung in the rafters. "We both ran from something," she said. "Me from the years, you from the ghosts. But maybe we ended up where we needed to be." Tomas rose, slower, his limp more pronounced tonight. He joined her at the altar, eyes scanning the cracked wood, the empty rows. "You thinking of reopening this place?" "I'm thinking of teaching," she said. "Children need a room without whiskey and bullets. Maybe this could be that." He smiled, faint but real. A church-turned-schoolhouse. That'd be a first. Dustwater's full of firsts these days. The front door creaked open, and Sheriff Hart stepped in, hat in hand. He looked older than he had last week, though maybe it was the weight of what hadn't been said. "Evening," he said, voice tentative. "Tomas. Miss Kane." Ellie inclined her head, but her spine straightened. "Ryland's gone," the sheriff said after a pause. "Horse came back without him. No sign past the bluffs. Anyone know what happened?" Neither of them spoke at first. Then Tomas stepped forward. "He left the way he came," he said, "looking for someone to punish. This land doesn't like men like that. Swallowed him whole." The sheriff studied him. "That all?" "It's enough," Ellie said, her voice like stone under silk. The sheriff nodded slowly, eyes flicking between them. "Lot of bad men have passed through here. Most keep going. I reckon we don't need to chase the ones who don't make it." He turned and left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him with a whisper of finality. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Will it be that easy?" Tomas asked. She shook her head. "No, but it's a start." Later that night, they walked the main street together. The saloon lanterns glowed amber, and the dirt road gleamed faintly under the starlight. Tomas carried a hammer, and a bag of nails. Ellie held a wooden placard in her arms, painted by hand with white letters that still smelled faintly of linseed. She climbed the steps of the church and nailed it to the door. Dustwater Schoolhouse. Lessons begin Monday. Tomas stood beside her, watching her work. His shoulder ached. His past still whispered. But in this quiet moment, with the stars hanging low and the wind finally warm, he felt something he hadn't in years. Rooted. "You staying, then?" he asked. Ellie stepped down and looked at him with a smile that didn't need words. She'd never been anyone's first choice. Too old, too worn, too late. But here, in this cracked town with its ruined church and broken men, she had found something worth holding on to. They didn't kiss. That wasn't the kind of story this was. But they stood close, shoulders brushing, eyes turned to the empty land beyond the rooftops. Whatever came next, they would face it the way they had faced everything, slow, steady, and unyielding. The prairie wind carried the scent of rain and smoke, and far beyond the hills, thunder murmured like an old god clearing his throat. Trouble would come again, as it always did. But tonight, Dustwater had peace. And in the quiet, Ellie Kane found not salvation, but something rarer, a place to begin,